So with this demonstration, we're going to go to our internet browser. If you're on a Chromebook, we're going to go and find Google Chrome. If you're on an iPad, you're going to go to Safari. When you get your internet browser up, what we're going to do is in the address bar, we're going to click and we're going to type in photopea.com. Now, I'm going to hit return or enter on my keyboard, and we should see this interface. Now, when it comes to this program, it's free. The one thing that's going to look different on your machine is that you will likely have an ad on the right-hand side. I paid a little bit in order to get rid of that ad. So we should see this interface. Now, the other thing I will mention before we begin is Photopea mirrors a professional grade program called Photoshop. The downside is Photoshop costs a lot of money. And so you get to use this professional grade program for free. So what we need to do is we're going to click on Open from Computer. When I click on this, I'm going to find my file. And so depending on if you're on a Chromebook, you're going to have a slightly different interface. You may need to go up to the upper left-hand corner and it might say Recent. If that's what you see, click on Recent and you should see a new list of files. Click on the file that you want to use in this program. On an iPad, what you're going to need to do is after you click on Open from Computer, you will get an Open from Photo Library. Click on Photo Library. After you're in the photo library, find the image that you want to use. After you've selected that image, there should be a little blue check mark, and then in the upper right-hand corner, you should have the option of clicking Add. Once you click Add, it will bring that image into Photopea. I'm going to go to this particular image and click Open. Now, when it comes to this interface, we have a lot of options. We're just going to focus on a few things. So what we want to do before we touch anything is we're going to fill in our character with color. What we need to do is we need to find this icon over here, and it is the gradient tool. And so it goes from light to dark. However, what we need to do is we need to click and hold and then let go. So click, hold, and let go. And what that should do is it should give us this sub menu. And what we're going to click on is the paint bucket tool. What the paint bucket will allow us to do is anything that is an enclosed shape, well, we can fill in with color. So I'm going to click on the paint bucket tool. I'm going to zoom back out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in quickly with my keyboard. And that is Command plus or Command minus in order to zoom in and out. We can also use this magnifying tool or the zoom tool in order to do roughly the same thing. And if you're on your Chromebook or the iPad, you can also do this sort of motion where you're kind of pinching your fingers together, and you do that on the screen. That will also work. So now that I have the paint bucket tool selected, if I click in this area, well, what happened is it filled everything in. I'm going to zoom in. And what this ended up doing is it filled in my drawing, but it filled in a lot. So we have two rules when it comes to using this program. One, we don't want to use black when we're filling in our drawing. Because the problem is, when we use black, well, it's going to merge with our outline. And it's going to be real difficult for us to get back our drawing. So, if you make a mistake, one of the great things about working on the computer is we can undo it. So, if we come over to our history, and this is in our upper right-hand corner, what it shows us is all of our previous steps, or all the steps that we have made. So I did the paint bucket tool. If I want to undo it, well, I can click on the state right above it. In this case, since I haven't done hardly anything, I can click on open, and that will undo that error. Now, one other thing I should mention is, depending on how you have things set up, if we come back here, you may not see this history. We have these two little arrows. If I click on this area right here, what it does is it collapses that window. And so, in order to see the history as well as our layers, we're going to click on these double arrows in order to expand it. So, the reason when I clicked and it filled everything in, it's because I have gaps within my drawing. I need to fill in these gaps before I can fill in my character with color. So I'm going to take my paintbrush tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw to connect these areas. We can get to the paintbrush tool by going over to the left-hand side and find the icon that looks like a paintbrush tool. Now, when I hover over this, it's telling you what it is as well as the shortcut key. So you can get to the paintbrush tool by hitting B. So if I click and drag, I can now paint in between those gaps to kind of close it off. So now, if I go back to my paint bucket tool, I'm going to click on the paint bucket tool. If I click again, it filled it in. Once again, we don't want to fill it in with black. So I'm going to undo that. So in order to change the color, what we can do is we can come down to the lower left-hand corner and click on this region. We're going to click on the black square. That black square will bring up the color picker window. And in this, I have all of my colors in the rainbow on this strip. And so, if I wanted to make my bear blue or a cyan, I can click in this area. Now, once I've clicked over here, I need to determine, well, do I want a bright cyan or a dark cyan? So we can click in this large box and determine the type of cyan we want. Now, before we do anything else, we need to click OK. If I click OK, then we have stored this color and we can use it. In order to make a brown is actually kind of a difficult color. What we need to do is, in between yellow and red is our orange. So I'm going to click right here. And we can see when we click on this area, well, we have our orange. If we drag this or click in the center, we can see how that orange changes to a brown. So I'm going to click OK. And now I can click and fill in my bear. And so we can keep coming back. I'm going to get this sort of turquoise color. Going to fill in the nose. And I'm going to fill in the mouth. And I'm going to zoom out. So, we've colored in our character. Now, let's focus on the background. In order for us to paint the background, yes, we could fill in everything around it. The downside of this approach is this red is now fused with our character. Yes, we still have some separation because we have the black outline. But what I'm going to do now is in my history, I'm going to click on the previous state, the paint bucket tool, to undo that red. What I'm going to do is, in order to delete this negative white space, so this region surrounding my character, I'm going to come to the magic wand tool. Now the magic wand tool, or if we hit W, what this will allow us to do is, I'm going to zoom in. And what I can do is click in this white space, and what we should get is this kind of dashed line that goes around our character. And it's sometimes a little faint. So maybe I'm going to show you in another part of the drawing. So let's take this area. I'm going to take the magic wand tool, click, and now we can kind of see it. It's a little bit more visible. What we're doing is we're making a selection. And a selection will allow us to edit and manipulate anything that is inside this dashed outline. So we could paint, we could change the color, and we can also delete. So if I don't want to edit in this area, I can take both the magic wand tool and click again. And that gets rid of the selection. I'm going to click again. The other option is we can come up to select and go to deselect. For the background, I'm going to click again on the white space, and I'm going to hit delete or backspace on my computer. So I'm going to do that. And the result is we should see an area with this sort of gray checkered board pattern. I'm going to go back up to select. And what I want to do is I'm going to click deselect. Now, deselect will only be available if you have an area selected. Let's click deselect. If I go back up here, since nothing is selected, this area, this option for deselect has been grayed out. And this is what we want. I'm going to zoom out. And so now we have our bear or our character in isolation. I'm actually going to come over to my layers and I'm going to double click on the text. And I'm going to change it to say bear and hit enter or return. what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to come up to the top here where it says layer. Click, and I'm going to go to new, and I'm going to go over, and I'm going to click layer. When I do that, what's going to happen is in my layers panel, where we just named our layer bear, we're going to have a new layer called layer 1, and it's going to be stacked on top of our bear layer. Click, and now we have this. What this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to take my brush tool. We're going to click on the brush tool. I'm going to make a Christmas tree. So I'm going to click on my color down here, change it to kind of a dark green, and click OK. Now I can draw, and my line weight for my paintbrush is fairly thin. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back over to the history, click on new layer, and with the brush tool, I'm going to come up to this area right here, and this is in the upper left-hand corner, and in the upper left, we're going to find the number, and it might be 10, it might be 15, and we're going to see this downward facing triangle. We're going to click on this. And this option is only available if you're on your brush. You might also have to hit B on your keyboard. Let's click on it. And what we can see is now we have some options. We can change the size of the brush. And I'm going to just make it a little bit larger so that way I can draw a Christmas tree. And I'm just going to quickly doodle this. I have a gap right here. I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to go back to my paint bucket, or you can hit G on your keyboard. Click, and click again, and it's filled in. Now, I painted the tree on top of the bear. Just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to come back over to my layers, double click, name this tree. So that way I know what graphic is on here. So the benefit of using the layers panel and making new layers is what I can do is I can click and drag this tree and this layer and put it behind the bear. And so what we're able to do is we can stack and rearrange different pieces. And so whatever is kind of lowest on the level is going to be in the back. Other things will be stacked on top of it. So in this case, the bear is on top. It's the closest thing to the viewer. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go back up to layer. I'm going to click new and new layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in a sun. I'm going to go back up here. Go down to my color. Let's click a bright yellow. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard in order to get to the brush. And I'm going to go back up to my brush options, click on this downward facing triangle with the number, and I'm going to increase the brush size. So if I have the brush size really large, I can just click once and I can get a perfect circle. Now, one of the other things that we're going to do is with this, right now, this was a perfect circle with a really nicely defined edge. Because the hardness on this one was at 100%. I'm going to make the same circle, but I'm going to take the hardness all the way down to 0. Now if I paint, we get this sort of soft, airbrushed quality, which is kind of cool. I'm going to do one other example. I'm just undoing that. You can undo by doing Command Z. I'm going to bring my hardness all the way back up. I'm going to make the brush size a little bit smaller. If I click once, all right, we have a really nice hard edge and it's fully opaque. Now, also with our brush tool, we have the options for the size and we also have opacity. So if I click on this option, this downward pointing triangle, I can reduce the opacity for the brush. If I put this at 50% and click, well, now we're seeing some of that grid pattern behind this yellow because it's somewhat invisible. It's somewhat transparent. So we have that as an option. So I'm going to bring that back up, undo this. I think the sun needs to be a little bit larger. So I'm going to just go back and I'm going to make this quite a bit larger. Click over here, and now we have the sun. One thing that I'm going to do is we have these layers. Maybe we don't want them in this specific location. What we can do is with the move tool or hit V on our keyboard, what this will allow us to do is for any one of these layers, we can now move it around. You might by default have this area after you're on the V, after you've clicked on the move tool or hit V on your keyboard, you by default might have the transform controls clicked off. We're going to actually check this option because what it will allow us to do is we're going to see this sort of box around our graphic. Now, what this will allow us to do is we can click on these corners and scale things up and scale things down. We can also, if we hover in those corners, our icon changes. If we're directly over it, we're going to get this sort of double arrow at a 45-degree angle. Just outside of it, we're going to get a double arrow that's in an arc. And what this will allow us to do is we can rotate that layer around. So I'm going to undo that. Let's come to the bear. And if I want to select the bear in my layers panel, all I need to do is click on the bear. And in order to identify which layer you're on, in the layers panel, it's going to be a lighter gray or it's going to be highlighted. In addition, around the thumbnail, we should have this dashed outline around it. The move tool with the transform controls also makes it a little bit easier for you to identify. So if I hover over this, I can scale this up and down, and I can rotate the character around. So I'm going to do a few more things. I'm going to put that down there. I'm going to go back up to layer, go to new layer, click, and now I'm going to add a shadow. I'm going to put my bear on some grass. So I'm going to take my brush, go down to my color, down here, get the color picker window. I'm going to make it dark green. And with the brush tool, I'm going to come back up to here, bring down the hardness. I'm also going to reduce the opacity. And we also have the option with this downward pointing triangle. We change the size. We can also change the shape. So with these two circles, these opaque kind of grayish white circles, we can click and drag, and you can see that we're going from a circle into an oval. So we can now see that that's happening right here. And so if I paint, and I just realized, I need to make sure my opacity, I'm going to put this at 50%. I'm going to now kind of paint in a shadow. And you're probably noticing, well, I just painted on top of my bear again. So in order to put the shadow behind the bear, we're going to come back over to the layers panel, click and drag, and put it behind the bear. I'm going to also put the tree in front of the shadow. We can either make a new layer up here, go to layer, go to new layer, or in the lower right-hand corner, we have this little icon. If we click on it, we can make a new layer there. I'm going to name this grass, because I'm going to paint some grass. I'm going to change my brush shape. I'm going to change the color of my grass. Now I'm going to decrease my brush size. Another way of increasing or decreasing your brush size is by using the bracket keys. And you can see that over in this area. We're going to drag this grass behind the shadow. And let's say I kind of want to maybe lower this grass. So I'm going to go back to my move tool and just drag it down a little bit. We're going to make a sky. So I'm going to go and make a new layer. Sky. And I'm going to put that behind the grass again. I went to G to get to the paint bucket tool. Click on our color picker. And I'm going to make a nice sky blue. And so we're getting close. I'm going to move these different elements. So we're going to move both the shadow, and drag that down. Click on the bear, drag the bear down, and the tree. Now, the one thing about the tree is so close to the grass. We can change it by going back to our paint bucket tool, clicking on a new color. And what we might want to do is, whenever you have the color picker window open, we can actually click on this image, and anything that we click on, we can see that the color picker window identifies that color. So I want to make this tree a little darker, so I just click on this current color, and that way I can just kind of drag it down a little bit, go to my paint bucket tool, click, and now it's darker. One of the other things I'm going to do is, real quick, I'm I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call this mountain. I'm going to put this behind the shadow. Change the color to kind of like a gray violet. And one question I had frequently is, painting straight lines is difficult. So one tool that we have in Photopea is if we click once with our brush tool, click and let go. If I move my mouse or cursor over here, and before I click, again, if I hold Shift and then click, and I'm continuing to hold Shift, then click, it will make a line from this point to this point. So I can do this and paint. Go back to our paint bucket tool, fill that in. I hit V on my keyboard to get to the move tool. And I'm going to rotate this and move this in place. Now, I can even take this mountain and let's say, well, I want to duplicate it. I can click on this mountain and drag it to this icon down here. Once again, this is a new layer. If I click on this mountain, drag it to here and let go, we get a copy of it. And so I can now move that, scale this down, and we can take that mountain and let's say we scale this one up. And now we're starting to get our scene. And I just have one more thing that I want to show. I'm going to click on the bear and let's say, well, we want to kind of paint within a part of our character. What we can do is, if I get my paintbrush tool, and let's say we want to add some stripes to our character. Let's just say we're going to give our bear almost some tan stripes. Well, with this layer selected for the bear, if I click and drag, well, you can see that while I painted over everything, it didn't stay within the lines. And that's kind of a bummer. I'm going to undo that. So Control Z or Command Z. So in order to paint just within this area, I need to do one step first. So in order to undo this, I'm going to do Command Z. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to my magic wand tool or hit W. If I click on this and go to the interior or this shape of my character and click, hey, we get that dashed line again. And what that dashed line will allow us to do is anything that is on the inside of that dashed line, we can edit it in any way we want. So now, if I take my brush tool and I try to paint over here, nothing's going to happen. But as soon as I move over to the inside of that selected area, I can now kind of draw, and it's self-contained. And so this will allow us to do just about anything with our character. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of a highlight, making it seem like there's a little bit of light that's hitting the bear. And maybe we'll add a little bit of a shadow. And so kind of on my character's belly, I'm just going to come in, add a shadow, and we can even put a shadow here. And we can do this until we're satisfied with our edits. Now, if we want to move on to another part of our character, we'll go back to the magic wand tool, click, and select another region. And so now I can paint in this area. So let's say we want this ear to be a little bit darker. In order to get out of this state, then we can go back up to select, go to deselect, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mustache to my character, because why not? And so this is kind of just an introduction into using a Photoshop-like program. And it's pretty cool. Now, in order to save our digital drawings, we need to come up to File, click on File, go to Export, and we're going to go to Export As, and go to JPG. JPG or JPEG, when I click on this, we should get this little interface. Now, it looks cropped, but it's just giving us a preview. So we can click on it, move it around, make sure that everything's the way we want it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this, and I'm going to add color at the end of it. So I just named my first name and last name -color. Now, I would suggest for the quality of this, leave it anywhere from 70 to 100%. The file size isn't that large, and we'll click Save. Now, when it comes to this, a JPEG is a compressed file. Ultimately, it will merge all of these layers. And so we won't be able to edit it further. However, if you want to go back into your design, now I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to go to Save as PSD. And PSD stands for Photoshop Document. The benefit of this file type is it will save all of your layers. So if I click on this, I'm going to have the ability to type in the name that I want this file to be. So I'm going to just put Aaron Pickens Color, and we're going to click Save. I'll replace. Now, it has saved all of this information. So if I accidentally lose this or I exit out of it, if I go back to Open from Computer and I find my file and click on the file name that I saved it as and click Open, I will have all of those layers here. And one of the other things about the layers is, well, we have these little eyeballs next to each one of them. What this will allow us to do is if we click on this icon, so right now we're on Bear, and I have this eyeball. If I click on this, it didn't delete that layer. What it did is it made it invisible. And sometimes this is what we want. We want to turn our layers on and off in terms of visibility. It can make our editing process a little bit easier if we want to focus on those mountains. Because right now, we like the placement of the bear. We want to work on the mountains, but stuff's in the way. And so now we can come into the mountains and start working. So this program is very complex. The great thing is this is an introduction. There's so much more to learn. If you like this, go to photopea.com and play around. The best way of learning art is just to explore. And so, this should get you started with a fairly complex editing program. And you can do just about anything with it. So, play around, have fun, and learn in the process.